Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Bernstein, Chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
Good afternoon. There are some questions that have many answers and no answers, or at least none that satisfy us. One such question is, why did the Holocaust happen? It also leads to other questions, such as, did the Holocaust have to happen? And once begun, what could be done about it? One question we can answer with both certainty and shame is what was done. Very little. The Holocaust was not an eruption of violence, like the 100 days of the Rwandan genocide, where we also failed to respond. The Nazis were in power for 8 long years before the mass murder of the Jews began. Those were 8 years in which their attitudes were crystal clear to the world at every step. And once the murder began, it lasted for 4 years. 4 years. It only ended when the war did, when our brave soldiers helped conquer Germany, and in doing so, liberated camps across Europe. Ultimately, winning the war was the only way to end the Holocaust. Yet it was not until 1944 when Allied troops were even in a position to do anything. But by that time, 4.5 million Jews had already been murdered. They were often betrayed by their neighbors, and they had been totally abandoned by the world. Their only hope was local help, and a tiny few, helped. And hence, one answer to that question: what can we do once genocide begins? We can help those around us, and some did. Who were those helpers? Those rare individuals who sacrificed to save a fellow human being. Yad Vashem has honored 23,788 individuals who risked their lives, freedom, and safety. It is interesting to note that Poland has the highest number of rescuers, 6,200, and yet 90%, and yet lost 90% of its Jewish community. The Netherlands has the highest, second highest number at 5,100 and lost 75% of its Jews. These statistics demonstrate the enormous odds of being helped. There are many rescuers whose names will never be known. But who were these 23,000 extraordinary individuals? They were from every country in occupied Europe. They were from every religion: Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, atheist. They were from every part of the political spectrum, from right to left. Some even had negative feelings about Jews. Some worked alone. Others worked as part of group efforts, such as the Danish rescue that ferried 7,000 Jews to safety in neutral Sweden, or Le Chambon, a poor Protestant village in France that hid 5,000. Why did these 23,000 rescuers choose to act in such dangerous circumstances? What made them so different from their societies, whose members overwhelmingly stood by and watched the horror unfold with utter indifference? Some have speculated that they were independent thinkers who did not look to society to make their decisions, but had an inner moral compass that guided them to do the right thing. In a few moments, the flags of the American Army liberating divisions will enter the Rotunda. Those flags remind us that in times of great problems, there are some things only the military can do. They remind us how much gratitude we owe our brave soldiers from World War II. But today, as we honor the rescuers, we should also be reminded that there are always things we as individuals can do. Whether it is facing the extreme of genocide or more common acts of injustice, what we do or fail to do matters. This is the legacy and challenge of those who had the courage not only to care, but to act. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of the flags of the United States Army Liberating Divisions, followed by the national colors. 1st Infantry Division, Falkenau an der Eger, and 101st Airborne Division, Landsberg. 2nd Infantry Division, Leipzig-Schonefeld and Spergau, and 82nd Airborne Division, Wobelin. 4th Infantry Division, Dachau Subcamps, and 20th Armored Division, Dachau. 8th Infantry Division, Wobelin, and 14th Armored Division, Dachau Subcamps. 26th Infantry Division, Gusen, and 12th Armored Division, Landsberg. 29th Infantry Division, Dinslaken, and 11th Armored Division, Gusen and Mauthausen. 36th Infantry Division, Kaufering Camps, and 10th Armored Division, Landsberg. 42nd Infantry Division, Dachau, and 9th Armored Division, Falkenau an der Eger. 45th Infantry Division, Dachau, and 8th Armored Division, Halberstadt-Zwieberge. 63rd Infantry Division, Kaufering Camps, and 6th Armored Division, Buchenwald. 65th Infantry Division, Flossenburg Subcamp, and 4th Armored Division, Ohrdruf. 69th Infantry Division, Leipzig-Tekla, and 3rd Armored Division, Dora-Mittelbau. 71st Infantry Division, Gunskirchen, and 104th Infantry Division, Dora-Mittelbau. 80th Infantry Division, Buchenwald and Ebensee, and 103rd Infantry Division, Landsberg. 83rd Infantry Division, Langenstein, and 99th Infantry Division, Dachau Subcamps. 84th Infantry Division, Alam and Salzwedel, and 95th Infantry Division, Wörl. 86th Infantry Division, Attendorn, and 90th Infantry Division, Flossenburg. 89th Infantry Division, Ohrdruf. Please remain standing for the presentation of the national colors. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Michael Oren of the State of Israel.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Madam Democratic Leader, the Honorable Secretary of the Treasury, distinguished members of the Legislature, the Honorable Speaker of the Parliament of Sweden, cherished guests. The legacy of the Holocaust bestows on us a double duty. First, we must not allow the memory of the 6 million to be trivialized. Human history is rife with atrocities and massacres and wars, but nothing must be equated with the enormity of the Holocaust. It is profoundly, it is unbearably unique. But paradoxically, our second duty is to prevent a second Holocaust from occurring. Now imagine for a second if a third of the Jewish people had not been annihilated. Imagine the doctors, the researchers, the artists. Imagine the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren flourishing throughout the world today. That is what we mean when we say never again. Yes, we must cherish the fact that we live in a time when there is a proud and a sovereign Jewish state. We must appreciate that state's remarkable accomplishments in science and technology and the arts. And we must value the historic alliance between Israel and the United States. Things are indeed different than they were 80 years ago, and yet at the same time we must acknowledge that evil did not enter the world in 1939 and exit in 1945, never to return again. We must admit that the genocidal hatred of Jews that burned during those years remains a fierce and recombustible scourge. We cannot ignore the similarities between the conditions that fostered the Holocaust and those we now witness today. Consider this. 80 years ago, the world was weary from devastating losses of a recent war. Economies were in crisis. Economic employment was high. Foreclosures commonplace. People were focusing inward, grappling with their own problems, and meanwhile, a radical militant movement dreamt of regional and global domination. Headed by a supreme leader, the movement burnt books. It killed its democratic opponents. It amassed vast arsenals of advanced weaponry and invaded neighboring countries. The radicals preyed on their nation's injured pride, and it stressed their racial superiority. That movement denigrated the Jewish people as a cancer that had to be cut out. And today, too, there is such a radical regime in Iran. It also has a supreme leader. It also butchers its democratic opponents. It supports terror and seeks regional and global hegemony. The Iranian regime similarly espouses racism. It denies the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis while pledging to murder 6 million more in Israel. And to achieve its abominable goals, Iran is developing the military nuclear capabilities and the missiles to carry them. Now, fortunately, today is not 80 years ago. Though tired of war and wrestling with economic difficulties, the United States is not watching passively. On the contrary, the White House and the Congress is leading the world in imposing harsh sanctions on Iran. President Obama has said that the United States will not contain a nuclear-armed Iran and keeps all options on the table. And Israel, the president said, has the right to defend itself against any Middle Eastern threat, and only Israel can best decide how to protect its citizens. We must never equate the Holocaust with any other event, but we must also never let it recur. Iran, in many ways, acts as Nazi Germany acted in the 80s, in the 1930s, but equipped with nuclear arms, Iran could blackmail the world, overrunning its major oil resources and endangering the lives of millions of human beings. We must not compare the Holocaust to any other situation, but at the same time, we cannot forget. We now have the opportunity, indeed the duty, to confront Iranian leaders with the unambiguous choice never posed to the Nazis. The Iranian regime can either abandon its military nuclear program or face truly crippling sanctions and a credible military threat. We have a dual duty. I'm reminded of that obligation by the theme of this year's Days of Remembrance, that theme choosing to act the stories of the rescuers. These inspiring stories are immortalized at Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Memorial and Research Center, which for 50 years has honored the righteous Gentiles who risked their lives and in many cases risked their families' lives to save Jews. Those heroes understood with all their souls the horrific uniqueness of the Holocaust. And so too do the survivors and the World War II veterans who have gathered with us today. My father was one of those GIs. He battled from Normandy to the Bulge, to the final victory, winning 2 Bronze Stars medals for valor en route. And not only as your son, Dad, but as Israel's ambassador to this great land, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you, and thank you to all the brave soldiers who fought alongside you. Rescuers, survivors, veterans, their mere presence warns us against equating the Holocaust with any other atrocity. Yet they also urge us to prevent the Holocaust's recurrence. Their presence reminds us to be vigilant. They tell us to be strong, and they exhort us always, always to remember.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Bloomfield, Director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
70 years ago, with Nazi Germany and its allies controlling virtually all of Europe, a group of underground activists in Warsaw formed an organization they called Żegota. It was a code name for the Polish Council to Aid the Jews. It was the only Polish organization during World War II run jointly by Jews and non-Jews from a wide range of political movements. Today, I want to recall the heroic work of one of those non-Jews. Irina Sendler had been helping Jews since the German invasion of Poland in 1939. Then, only 29 years old, she immediately began creating false documents for Jews. Knowing of this work and her training as a social worker, Żegota asked her to head its section responsible for rescuing children. Now, the conditions for families trapped in the Warsaw Ghetto were dreadful. Those who managed to survive rampant starvation and disease later faced deportation. Either way, hope did not seem like an option. With her colleagues in Żegota, Irina organized an effort to smuggle children out of the ghetto and place them in orphanages, convents, and private homes. How did they get these children out of the ghetto, which was so carefully guarded? Some got out underground through sewers, basements, and tunnels. Others above ground, hidden in trunks, potato sacks, even coffins. For 16 months, Irina persuaded families to give her their children so that they might live. After the war, she recalled, and I quote, "There were terrible scenes. Sometimes the parents would say, 'Come back,' and I would come back a few days later, and the family had been deported. One mother wanted a child to leave while the father did not, and they asked me what was the guarantee, but what guarantee could I give them?" Knowing there were no guarantees of anyone's survival did not deter Irina from planning the eventual reunion of these families after the war. On tiny slips of paper, she carefully recorded the Jewish name and the new Christian name, as well as the location of every child she hid. These slips of paper were placed in jars that were buried under an apple tree in a friend's garden. In 1943, Irina was captured by the Gestapo and tortured. Having refused to divulge information about her activities or Żegota colleagues, she was sentenced to death. What happened to Irina? On the day of her execution, she managed to escape. But instead of doing what I think most of us would have done, going into hiding, she resumed helping Jews and continued to do so until the end of the war, despite the fact that the beatings by the Gestapo left her with permanent problems walking. What happened to the children she hid? Irina and her network hid 2,500 children, and the majority survived the war. So what happened to the names in the jar? It became an inspiration to a group of teenagers in Kansas who wrote a play called Life in a Jar, which was performed 100 times in 8 states. And then finally we ask, what happened to Irina's legacy? Communist Poland refused to recognize her heroism, but before she died in 2008, at the age of 98, Democratic Poland finally honored her. And in response, this is what she wrote: "Every child saved with my help is the justification for my existence on this earth, and not a title to glory." So today, we will not glorify Irina Sendler, but in a world that will always confront evil, we must glorify her courage, her humanity, and all of her extraordinary actions that will endure for all of us as an inspiration for the ages.
Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary of the Treasury, Timothy F. Geithner.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Leader, Mr. Ambassador, survivors of the Holocaust, and distinguished guests. The museum asked me to speak today about Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau's work on behalf of European Jews during World War II. But before I relate those events, I want to start by recognizing Robert M. Morgenthau, his son, who helps maintain the legacy of his father's work. Bob could not be here today because he's giving a speech at West Point at a Holocaust remembrance event. We all admire Bob's long and distinguished work in public service, and it's appropriate we honor Bob today as we honor his father. And I also want to pay tribute to the men and women of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum who have made it such a vital institution. And their work has helped show millions of people in vivid and painful detail the dangers of unchecked hatred. And they brought us here together in this great place to remember not just the millions who died, but also those who chose to act to save lives. Now, Henry Morgenthau served as the Secretary of the Treasury from 1933 to 1945. And he believed that individuals serving in government carry a moral responsibility. He was not constrained by the limits of his formal authority. It didn't matter to Morgenthau that the Treasury Department was not the Department of War or the Department of State. He was not concerned with the risk of criticism or with the strength of opposition to what he believed was right. And Morgenthau was prescient about the threat of war with Nazi Germany and the need for early American involvement. In 1938, he persuaded President Roosevelt to give Treasury significant authority over military purchasing policies 2 years ahead of the Lend-Lease program. And Morgenthau used this authority to help arm our allies and to help prepare the nation for war. He was instrumental in the effort to stockpile and ramp up production of war materials, and crucially, he enabled the United Kingdom and France to purchase American aircraft, often over the objections of the War Department and isolationists in Congress. Now, later in the war, news of the mass murder of European Jews came to the attention of a small group of men at Treasury. Josiah Du Bois, a Treasury Assistant General Counsel, and John Paley, who was Treasury's Chief of Foreign Funds Control, uncovered mounting evidence that State Department officials were systematically undermining efforts to save Jews in Europe. These state officials were delaying licenses necessary to provide financial support to relief organizations across Europe, licenses that would have enabled the rescue of hundreds of thousands of Jews. They were denying visas to refugees, and they were blocking the spread of information about the Holocaust. The State Department first received word of the final solution on August 11th, 1942, in a message from Gerhard Riegner, who was the World Jewish Congress representative in Bern, Switzerland. And upon receiving confirmation of the news that November, the department then acted to suppress the evidence. Du Bois, this lawyer at Treasury, set to work on a report, which was presented to Secretary Morgenthau by the General Counsel of the Treasury, Randolph Paul, on January 13, 1944. The memo bore the chilling title, Report to the Secretary on the Acquiescence of this Government in the Murder of the Jews. And the first page read, and I want to quote this, "Unless remedial steps of a drastic nature are taken, and taken immediately, I am certain that no effective action will be taken by this government to prevent the complete extermination of the Jews in German-controlled Europe, and that this government will have to share for all time the responsibility for this extermination." Morgenthau moved quickly, and that Sunday, January 16th, Paley, Randolph Paul, and Secretary Morgenthau met with President Roosevelt. They explained to the president that because other parts of the government were resisting action, the only solution was to create a body with independent authority in the matter of refugees. And President Roosevelt agreed, and 6 days later, he issued Executive Order 9417, which established the War Refugee Board. The board's charter declared that it would, quote, effectuate with all possible speed the rescue and relief of victims of enemy oppression who are in imminent danger of death. John Paley was named executive director, and at Morgenthau's direction, Paley set up office on the 4th floor of the Treasury and began his work. Paley had to secure private funds for the majority of the board's activity, but Paley was industrious, and he was relentless, and he was effective. He secured a haven for 1,000 Jews at Fort Ontario in Oswego, New York. He helped purchase boats to ferry thousands of refugees out of Romania. Under his leadership, the War Refugee Board streamlined the process for issuing licenses so that relief organizations in Europe could provide funds and aid within weeks of requesting it. and the board sent representatives to neutral countries which assisted in evacuating Jews into safe territory. One of those representatives was a Treasury employee named Ivar Olsson, who was sent to Sweden. In Stockholm, Olsson helped send a young Swede named Raoul Wallenberg under diplomatic cover into Hungary, and Wallenberg's efforts saved as many as 100,000 Hungarian Jews. Ivar Olsson's son Jerry is with us today, as is George Lesser, whose father, Lawrence Lesser, also served on the War Refugee Board. And by the end of the war, the work of Paley and the board had saved some 200,000 Jews from almost certain death. Now, years later, Paley said, "What we did was little enough. It was late and little." But without the work of the War Refugee Board and without the actions Morgenthau had taken to arm and prepare the Allies, the history of that time would have been even darker. When we think about the Holocaust, we are forced to come to terms with more than just the evil of Adolf Hitler. We must also confront the failures that allowed this genocide to occur, the moral failures, the institutional failures, the cowardice and apathy and hate. Henry Morgenthau, John Paley, and Joe Du Bois refused to accept those failures. They knew that when institutions fail, individuals must act. When warned by an official of the political risks in what Morgenthau was contemplating, Morgenthau responded, "Don't worry about the publicity. What I want is intelligence and courage." And these men understood their own power as individuals in public life to make a difference. They understood their obligation to do so, and they took that noble obligation seriously. And I am proud to say that this tradition continued at Treasury. Stuart Eisenstadt, who served as Deputy Secretary of the Treasury in the 1990s, helped achieve a measure of justice for victims of the Holocaust and European Jews by negotiating through sheer force of will and individual initiative landmark agreements with foreign governments to cover restitution, compensation for forced labor, recovery of looted art and money, and the payment of insurance policies. More recently, Undersecretary of the Treasury Stuart Levy and a group of individuals at Treasury built, essentially from the ground up, the world's most creative and most effective system of financial sanctions to stem the flow of money to terrorists and to deter Iran from pursuing its nuclear ambitions. And their work, led today by Undersecretary of the Treasury David Cohen, is crucial to thwarting those who would kill in the name of hatred. Now, we live in a world in which people still possess an alarming willingness to abuse, to imprison, and to murder others because of the God they worship or because they are different. And in confronting this reality, we are always reminded of the complexities of the world, the shades of gray, the intricacies of choice, the risks of action and of inaction. And this world is, of course, a complicated place, but our basic responsibilities as human beings are not complicated. To protect the weak, to shelter those in need, to resist evil in all its forms. And these are our responsibilities. They cannot be fulfilled only with thoughtful reflection. They require action. The Talmud says, "Whoever is able to protest against the transgressions of the world and does not is responsible for the transgressions of the world." John Paley, Joe Du Bois, and Henry Morgenthau, these men understood. They protested against the transgressions of the world, and they made a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joshua Bolton, Vice Chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
To the side of the platform are 6 candles. These 6 candles renew in us the memory of 6 million murdered in the Holocaust, along with millions more. Today, we honor not just those who perished, we honor also those who survived, some by their wits, some by miracles, and some with the help of brave rescuers. And today especially, we honor those rescuers. Just as the magnitude of the crimes exceeds our imagination, so does the magnitude of the helpers' courage. Some rescuers acted as individuals. Others were supported by organizations or even governments. In Secretary Geithner's compelling remarks just now, he shared with us the little-known story of the Treasury Department, whose boldness motivated, perhaps even shamed our government to create the War Refugee Board late in the war. It was the War Refugee Board that recruited a 32-year-old Swedish businessman named Raoul Wallenberg to save Jews. This year marks a century since Wallenberg's birth. He was not schooled in international diplomacy, nor in clandestine operations, but he had courage, and that, along with intelligence and imagination, was enough. Wallenberg would lead one of the most extensive and successful rescue efforts during the entire Holocaust by issuing Swedish certificates of protection and establishing hospitals, nurseries, and even a soup kitchen in Budapest, where he also created more than 30 safe houses. He worked closely with Swiss diplomat Karl Lutz and Italian businessman Giorgio Perlasca. By the time Budapest was liberated, more than 100,000 Jews remained. 100,000 Jews in the heart of Nazi Europe. Their survival was the result of the extraordinary efforts of Wallenberg and his colleagues. Tragically, liberation marked a different fate for Wallenberg, who was arrested by the Soviets and died in a Soviet prison. The creation of the War Refugee Board and the efforts of Wallenberg stand in marked contrast to the American response just 5 years earlier, when in 1939, our government refused to allow the entry of 908 Jewish refugees at our own shores. This was the ship St. Louis, whose passengers had landing permits to stay in Cuba while they awaited approval for immigration to the United States. After Cuba denied them entry, they sailed to Miami. Yet in spite of extensive press coverage, the US government decided not to let them land here, even temporarily. 532 of them would end up trapped in Nazi Europe. 254 perished. 254 individuals who could so easily have been saved. So today, as we light these 6 candles, we recall what was done to rescue and what could have been done. We resolve to learn from the past, and we recommit ourselves to doing better in the future. Now I would like to call up the candle lighters. Assisting us in our candle lighting will be Brandon Holden, a member of the Stephen Tyrone Johns Summer Youth Leadership Program, which was established by the museum in memory of Officer Johns, who died heroically in 2009 while protecting museum visitors and staff. For the first candle, John Boehner of Ohio, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and Helen Goldkind. Born in a part of Czechoslovakia that was later occupied by Hungary, but beyond the reach of Raoul Wallenberg, Helen was deported to Auschwitz after the end of the war, and after the end of the war sent to Sweden to recuperate. Today, she is a museum volunteer. For this special occasion, she and the speaker are joined by the Honorable Per Westerberg, Speaker of the Swedish Parliament, who is leading a Swedish delegation to the U.S. in honor of the centennial of Wallenberg's birth. We are honored that the delegation present here today also includes Princess Madeleine, Jacob Wallenberg, Raoul Wallenberg's cousin, and Michael Wernstedt, Wallenberg's great-nephew. Representative Nan Hayworth of New York is joined by Ruth B. Mandel. Ruth, who served as vice chair of the Holocaust Museum, was born in Vienna and fled with her parents in 1939 aboard that ship, the St. Louis. When the ship was forced back to Europe, her family was sent to Great Britain. Representative Betty Sutton of Ohio is joined by Roman Freeman. Roman was born in Poland, where at the age of 3, he was hidden in a neighbor's apartment, never knowing until liberation that his mother was hiding in a coal bin in the basement of the same building. Representative Dean Heller of Nevada is joined by Beatrice Muchman. Born in Berlin, Beatrice and her family fled to Brussels. After the Nazi occupation of Belgium, her parents brought her to the home of 2 Catholic women for safekeeping. Representative Gregory Meeks of New York is joined by Joanna Newman. Born in Germany, after Kristallnacht, Joanna and her family escaped to Albania, where they were hidden by a Muslim family. Johanna is on the staff of the museum. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon is joined by Relly Keisler Greenglass. Relly was born in Czechoslovakia, where she was hidden with her mother in the basement of a Catholic family's house.
El Mole Rachamim, Prayer for the Dead, will be chanted by cantor Ozzy Schwartz. Samuel Frankel, a survivor from Poland, will lead us in reciting Kaddish.
Please rise.
Zohar מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 מיליוני אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים, נשים, ילדים וילדות שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנחנקו, שנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם יימח שמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה, מאוטהאוזן ובשאר מחנות ההשמדה, ומסרו נפשם על קידוש השם. בעבור שכולנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן הבעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו ושלום על משכבם
יסקדל ויסקדש שמי רבה, ויולמדי ברוך אלסי, וימליך מלכותי, וחייכון וימחון וחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם לעולמי עולמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויסדר ויסעלה ויסעלל שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תשבחתה ונחמתה, ואמירן ביולמה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרמיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ונאמר אמן.
Please remain standing for the singing of the Hymn of the Partisans, led by Cantor Schwartz.
Soll nicht kein und nass, du gehst dem letzten Weg. Chotsch Himmeln bleiene, verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Sveta poigt und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Sveta poigt und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Never say that you are on your final way. Though leaden skies may be obscure in cloudless day, the hour we yearn for will eventually draw near, and our march to step will drumbeat we are here. The hour we yearn for will gently draw near, and our marching steps will drumbeat we are here. אל נא תאמר הנה דרכי האחרונה, את יום האור הסתירו שמי העננה. זה יום נחשפנו לעוד יעל ויבוא, ומצעדנו עוד ירים אנחנו בו. זה יום נחשפנו לעוד יעל ויבוא, ומצעדנו עוד ירים אנחנו פה.
Please be seated while the Liberating Division flags are retired. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our program. Thank you for sharing our commitment to Holocaust remembrance.